Welcome, everyone, to the HeroX Innovation Leadership Speaker Series. I'm Jamie Elliott, and I'm joined today by Bailey Evans. Bailey is the Managing Director of G Beta Wyoming, a program of Generator. Bailey, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey in innovation and startup world acceleration so far.
Yeah, sure. So probably makes sense for me to start with the program that I run, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how we
Sure.
got there. So the G Beta Wyoming program is what Generator calls a pre-accelerator program. So it's a 7-week program. We teach the math, the milestones, the metrics of venture capital. Do you really want venture capital? How much do you want to raise? When do you want to raise it? Why do you want to raise it? Are you really sure you want venture capital? Here's what that means. Are you going to give up some control? You're going to give up what you're going to give up in order to get the money today. And so there's a lot of learning to be done. Those are not things that people just know. You're not born knowing those things. And so we teach a lot about that. And then also, what milestones should you be striving for in order to impress investors? How much growth is really, how much do you really need in terms of revenue or in terms of waiting lists or other proxies for revenue? So it's a little bit of sometimes a reality check for people who maybe think they want venture but don't really know what that means. So we try to help them understand what they're getting themselves into. And then if they decide that that's the journey that they want, we can help them meet those milestones and those metrics to entice investors. And so in Wyoming, it's a 7-week program and it's entirely free for founders to participate. So we take applications, there's an application and interview process. We choose 5 companies at a time into 2 cohorts each year, and this one in the spring and one in the fall. And they don't pay anything to participate. There's no fees, there's no equity exchange. And in Wyoming, that's because Microsoft pays for it. So Microsoft has data centers here in Cheyenne. They want to be a good neighbor, they want to spur innovation and job growth for Wyoming. And so they contract with Generator to pay for this program for the state of Wyoming, which is amazing. And so in other parts of the country, our G Beta programs are sponsored by other corporations or universities or municipalities or really anybody that wants to kind of spur innovation and create a startup environment. So we've been running the G Beta Wyoming program since 2020. We just finished our 11th cohort. So we do 2 a year. We've had 11 now. We've got 55 alumni companies.
Wow.
Cumulatively, those companies have raised about 45 million, a little more than $45 million total, and created something like 300 jobs across the state as well. And so we're seeing some good momentum in a small state like Wyoming. That's a significant amount. In fact, I like to say, if 300 people worked at one company in Wyoming, it would be one of the biggest companies in our state. So you have to put in perspective how tiny Wyoming's population is. So I got into this. Launched the program in 2020 when we were first originally contracted to run the program. Before that, I worked at the Wyoming Business Council, which is kind of our state's economic development agency. Before that, I worked in nonprofits, fundraising, marketing, and then I actually have a journalism degree from Colorado State University. Don't tell anybody that in Wyoming. They don't like those 3 letters, CSU. But I did get a
Mhm.
journalism degree some time ago and thought I was going to be a journalist. And now I get to use my storytelling and sort of data deep dive curiosity to help startups in Wyoming. So that was kind of a long winded answer to your question, but that's the background.
What does your job then entail as managing director? You're overseeing it all. You're seeing the cohorts. You have a team that works on the curriculum for the G Beta. Yeah, how does the whole thing function? Can you go a little bit deeper on that?
Yeah, sure. So I am actually the only employee in Wyoming that works at Generator. So I live in Cheyenne. I've lived here for 15 years or something. The rest of my team at Generator lives elsewhere and we all work remotely, or most of us work remotely. So yeah, I came into this with a bit of a playbook in 2020 when we launched the first cohort. It was like, okay, it's 7 weeks. Week 1, you focus on market and competition. Week 2, we focus on revenue models. Week 3, we focus on financing and milestones. And then, yeah, we've got marketing support. We've got graphic designers and video editors at Generator that help with recruitment and things like that. But it's just me here going to the pitch contests and meeting founders and going to the university and turning over the rocks and shaking the bushes to find new patent filings or just new business filings and recruit them and hold office hours and give them some advice that hopefully they find helpful and then ultimately apply for the G Beta program. So I like to think of my job in Wyoming really as a gardener. A lot of people in Wyoming are hunters.
Mhm.
You may know that, actual real life hunters. And in my job, it's a little bit more like, I'm doing less time standing on a cliff with my binoculars, like looking for the deal of a lifetime. I'm doing more of the like plant 100 seeds and then water them and
Right.
nurture them and help them grow, and then maybe one or two of them um, will go on to some really great, amazing, big growth.
How do you find the startups? How do you find the people that are right for your program, and kind of nurture that community? And then on the flip side of that, what does what does it look like for an alum who has gone through and you're keeping in touch with them and leveraging them now as seasoned to help the program?
Yeah, yeah, good questions. So, for the first part of that, how do I find them? I've been doing this now for going on 6 years, and my strategy has definitely evolved and changed. And I actually think just being in Wyoming, more people are starting to come to me than in the very beginning, in the early stages. It was a very manual process, literally finding new business filings and looking up new patents and going to events and trying to host coffee shop events and meetups and things, and just trying to get people to come out of the woodwork a little bit. And it was a bit of a slog. Like the first cohort, we had probably 50 applications. Second one, we had maybe 40. After that, it went down to 20s and 30s. And over the last couple of years, it's gotten back up kind of into the 50s. And I would say the 50 that I do get are more aligned to what I'm looking for than they were in the beginning. And I think that's because Wyoming in general is starting to understand, what does high growth and venture capital really mean? I've gotten better at understanding what that means for myself too. And so, yeah, they start to come to me, but really it's still a very manual process. I look up who filed a patent in the last 2 years and new businesses, and trying to keep an eye on the different industries that are sort of having a moment. In Wyoming, blockchain and crypto is kind of an industry that we're all keeping an eye on. And then, yeah, it's a lot of pitch contests and word of mouth and referrals. Definitely, I get a lot from referrals. So, trying to help the local SBDC. There's a few other programs. Wyoming doesn't have a ton. So, we all know each other. We all refer to each other. And having the other ecosystem partners understand what GBeta is and how it can be helpful, and then getting good referrals from them has been really valuable. And then the second part of your question for alumni, yeah, I mean, as long as they have finished the GBeta program, they're kind of part of the Generator alumni portfolio family for as long as they want to be. So they get access to our national, network of investors and mentors and other founders, as long as that's helpful to them. It does happen frequently where they may come through the GBeta program, and like I said, sometimes it's a bit of a reality check. And so they may say, okay, maybe I'm not quite ready to raise money. Give me 6 months, 12 months, something like that. And then they'll come back, and they still have access to all of the resources. We also do conference series. We do this thing called lightning rounds where they get to sign up to meet with investors, and it's sort of a mutual opt in situation. And we set up lots of meetings that way. One thing I guess I didn't mention that's probably helpful is that the G Beta Wyoming program is entirely virtual, except for our showcase that we will have. Our next one is in June. But the program itself, so the coaching, the one on ones, the lunch and learn series that we do, it's all done virtually so that I can recruit companies from all across the state. It's a large state. So I'm not expecting people to drive 8 hours across the state.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like, I mean, the community that you're building and nurturing is more than just the startups, right? You've got partners. We got to speak to one of your partners, Lindsay Stadtheit at Laramie County Community College. It sounds like you all are building quite the ecosystem there. With respect to the startups, if I'm a startup and I'm thinking an accelerator or maybe a pre-accelerator might be good for me, how do I know I'm a good fit, or it's a good fit for me, or it's the right time to go and learn these things? What are the signals that I would look for to maybe apply?
Yeah, I love that question too. So it really depends on the accelerator that you're applying for, because they're all little unique
Yeah.
snowflakes. So sometimes they have an industry specific requirement. So you need to be in education technology, or you need to be in manufacturing, or you need to be doing something in software or something like that. So you have to kind of keep an eye on that. For G Beta Wyoming, it's industry agnostic. We don't have an industry specific focus, so you can be in any industry. Also, accelerators often have kind of a stage requirement. So maybe you need to have made $1, made one sale. You need to have one little bit of revenue coming in. Or maybe it's you need to have had a prototype that's been tested, or something like that. Most of the time, it's not that rigid. Where for G Beta Wyoming specifically, I also don't have a stage requirement. My only requirement for G Beta Wyoming is you need to be in Wyoming somehow, somewhere, like either living here or doing a majority of your business here, or have some meaningful presence that's going to contribute to the economy of Wyoming. And then the other requirement would be, has the potential to be a high growth venture backable type of company. So it needs to be something that can be sold beyond the borders of your community. A brick and mortar, a salon, a mechanic, a t-shirt company is not necessarily going to have that type of broad sales opportunities. Whereas an innovation driven, something with a patent, something that could grow and, you build it once and then you sell it millions and millions of times all around the world. So that's what I'm looking for. A lot of the companies that I've worked with in G Beta Wyoming, sometimes they don't even realize necessarily what they have. They've invented something cool and haven't necessarily done a lot of research on what's the market. And so sometimes it's up to me to say, do you know what you have here? Do you like this is something that you could sell the heck out of, like right from your home in Cheyenne. And then other times it's kind of the reverse of that, which is like, oh, I'm onto something really amazing. You can make plenty of money and be very successful and wealthy building a brick and mortar type of business in Cheyenne, Wyoming, or in Riverton, Wyoming, or wherever. It's just that you, as the owner, founder of that company, probably don't want venture capital in that case because it's just not the right type of financing for them. So sometimes I have to be the one to kind of like filter those out.
I'm seeing similarities to challenge competitions. We have challenge competitions that are pure ideation. NASA ran one called Brilliant Minds for Pure Blue Skies. And they just wanted to say, see, what are the craziest ideas that you have for making air travel more sustainable?
I
Right?
love it.
Just any idea. It was like a 5-page paper or 7-page paper. And that was it. Single phase. And it was done. And like some of the coolest ideas that came out of it were, space lasers from solar powered satellites that shoot lasers at airplanes that then power them.
Yeah.
Extremely dangerous, but also like it would work. If you could control it and make it safe, it would actually work. But then there are challenges that we do a lot of where it's multi-phase and that second phase involves some kind of prototyping or scaling. And with that, that means that the dynamic changes that in the first phase, you have to demonstrate feasibility and you have to demonstrate your capacity as a team or as an innovator to do what you say you're going to do in the second phase. And so you're describing this qualifier of my idea can scale, it can sell, it can go broader. And so that means the signal to me is they have to be able to see that at that point, at the point that they're applying to your accelerator to G beta, that they can say, I've done enough homework to show that this has teeth.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say in most cases that's true. Most of the time they come to me with an application. They understand their market. They say I'm onto something and I say, "Yeah, I think you are." Sometimes it happens where they may apply or I'll be talking to them at a coffee shop or on Zoom or whatever. For example, I had one company in my last cohort and he's diabetic and he wanted a way to be able to carry around his insulin that needed to stay cold. And there's not a good like product for that. How do you keep something small cold for like days at a time? He wanted to go camping and, hiking and maybe for power outage situations and stuff.
Sure.
There's no good way to do that. And so he, being kind of an electronic tinkerer himself, he put something together that actually just screws onto the top of like a steel water bottle and it's solar powered and it's rechargeable and it circulates cold air and it has a little monitor on it so you can tell what temperature is on the inside. And he just, he came into this meeting kind of like, I had this idea and I made a solution that works for me. And I was like, my friend, I think you are onto something that could be sold like around the world. And, there's millions of diabetics and probably others who need a similar solution for something like this. And so, he was just kind of like, okay, cool. Like he didn't
Yeah,
really know necessarily what he was onto. So sometimes I get to be the one that tell them, "Hey, I think you're onto
that's
something that's
great.
even bigger here."
Yeah, I mean, even we've talked to people who have developed solutions for medication delivery to remote parts of the world, right?
Yeah.
And it's like if those medications need to stay cold, it's more than just the personal, I need to do this. It's I need to do this for single deliveries or for scaled deliveries. Are there other projects like those that you can talk about where you've just been kind of blown away, or ones that you've seen be great success, or ones that weren't ready but like they got so much out of the program and it was rewarding for them?
Yeah, yeah. I've got examples of all of those. So, the insulin storage, he made a prototype. He's made this one time. And so he was in this early stage of like, okay, how do I scale this? How do I figure out these economies of scale? If I make 100 of them, how do I have to retail? What do they retail for? All of those kinds of questions. Meanwhile, someone in his cohort was a little more on the like napkin stage version of this. It's a spin out from the University of Wyoming. They did a student project and determined that these data centers, specifically these small and medium sized data centers, they need a redundant and reliable power source that's not necessarily tied into city power or municipal power. And so they had done this whole project on how to solve for that. And their solution was these self contained natural gas power plants that these data centers can actually just install on their own property. And so, like, that was another one where I was like, and I think they knew too. They're like, oh, we know we're onto something, but like, how do we get it from student report on a piece of paper or like bunch of paper to actual real world? Like, are you ready to start digging in ground and installing natural gas power plants? And so, that's been a fun one to try to sort of problem solve through. And then like let me trying to think of like maybe my latest stage. So I worked with one early on. This company is called Frog Creek Partners out of Casper, Wyoming, and they were and still are manufacturing. He calls it like a coffee filter for storm drains, basically. So it's this like net material and it's connected to a steel grate, basically, and you can slide it. You know, when you see storm drains, they just look like a steel grate. It basically looks the same, but it has this like mesh netting bag underneath it and it catches pollution, cigarette butts, trash, even like chemicals and things like that. It catches before it can go into rivers and waterways and stuff like that. So it's keeping
Nice.
pollution out of city water, really out of all of our water because it all it all ends up in one place. And so they came in and did G beta. He'd already raised, I want to say, $1 million or so and was just trying to figure out how to scale it beyond his community. And so yeah, he's still doing great. He's raised some additional money, but he was able to fund this through grants from cities and just through revenue, pure revenue, by people just buying them from him. So he's been doing really well and continuing to grow over the last few years.
It's great to see these folks get to where they're trying to get to, but
Yeah.
also in a way that isn't compromising to what they're trying to build. We got to do one called Watts on the Moon. Teams built solutions that can transmit and store electricity that's generated on the moon. And they had to build these and test them in a vacuum chamber at NASA. And first place team was a university team. They did an amazing job and they won $1 million. Second place team was a startup out of Colorado, and their name was the Orbital Mining Corporation. So their mission is excavation on the moon. It's like if we're going to build a space station, a lunar base, then we need to know how to dig and how to drill and how to secure infrastructure on the moon, which is true. But it had nothing to do with power storage and transmission. But they were really good at solving problems, and I got to meet them at the final event, and they told me how much that money, that prize money, meant to them because it kept them alive. But at the same time, I knew it was non-dilutive seed money, that keeps them alive. And so it didn't compromise what they were really after. And they got to have a lot of fun while they were doing it. But speaking of events, you've got an event coming up on June 11th. What's happening on June 11th?
Yeah. So after every cohort of G Beta Wyoming, we do our startup showcase. And it's not a contest or anything like that. There's no money on the line. It's just a chance for these founders that have just finished this pretty intense program to invite their friends, their family, the community. We put up a stage, give them a microphone, let them do their pitch for their cheerleaders, have some drinks and have some snacks and just sort of like toast to Wyoming entrepreneurship and the growth and changes that we've seen. So, yeah, that'll be on June 11th at 4 o'clock at the Laramie County Community College in their Flex Tech building, which is a really nice spot. There's big windows, you can see the prairie, and we put up a stage and like it's just a really fun opportunity, like I said, to cheer on and toast to Wyoming innovators who are doing something really hard.
Yeah.
Building a new company on its own anywhere is really hard. And then doing it in a place like Wyoming adds another layer. Wyoming does have some great support systems, but it would be hard to argue that it's easier to build an innovative company in Wyoming than in Silicon Valley. So they're doing something really hard, and they are dedicated to doing it in a place like Wyoming where we want to keep them around. So yeah, it's a free event. We'd love to have anybody come out, and I'll share the RSVP link with you. I'd love to have people come.
Yeah, we'll put that in the description, and in the post for this. That's really great. I guess another question I have, because you have a unique perspective of understanding, I think, at least two positions. Someone who's managing an accelerator, managing a program like this where it is more difficult to innovate and maintain the entrepreneurial spirit, but also you see the perspective of the startups day in and day out who are trying to go through this. So, what advice would you have for people in your position? And what advice would you have for startups in Wyoming or out of Wyoming that are just, it is on the back of an envelope or on a napkin right now, and they're thinking about joining something like G Beta?
Yeah. Sure. Okay. So for the first part, advice to people who are maybe looking to build a startup ecosystem in a place like Cheyenne, Wyoming, or anywhere, I guess I would just say be prepared to do a lot of really manual tasks. People aren't necessarily just going to come to you. There was not a lot of what we call spray and pray marketing, right? Like I didn't do a lot of social media ads. I didn't put radio ads out or anything like that. It was me finding email addresses or phone numbers and calling people and saying, "Hey, let's go get coffee," or "Hey, I I saw you were in this pitch contest and I'd love to learn more about what you're working on. Perhaps you might be interested in learning about G Beta as well." And it's just a lot of that. It's a lot of building relationships, especially in a place where you're not going to go to a coffee shop and trip over three entrepreneurs and three investors in Wyoming. You're just not. You might in Boston or New York or Silicon Valley, but not here. So you have to actively build it. And that's kind of why I say I like to think of myself as a gardener, because there may not be a lot of angel investors in Wyoming, but there's quite a lot of people with potential to be angel investors. So maybe I can plant that seed and tell them, "Hey, have you ever thought about angel investing?" And they might say, "What does that mean?" And then I can explain what that might mean. Maybe they'd like to come and meet some companies and nurture and grow this over time. And it takes a lot of time and patience, and it's going to feel a lot like nothing's changing for a while, and then all of a sudden you'll get to do a podcast interview, and you'll think back on 5 years of work, 6 years of work, and realize, oh yeah, we've come a long way. One of my founders has one of my favorite phrases, which is, "The world is changed by patiently applying relentless pressure," or something like that, like day after day, chipping away at it. That's how the Grand
Yep.
Canyon was formed, right?
Yep.
And then I think for the second part of your question, I don't think people ask enough, what's your advice for investors? Because I have some advice too. My advice for startups is read a lot. Read Lean Startup, read books, listen to podcasts, read essays, Paul Graham essays. Figure out what you're getting yourself into and learn from others' journeys and others' mistakes as well, and have some idea of what do you want your life to look like? Because if you want venture capital, your life will look very different than if you want a small business loan, a bank loan, something like that, where you can finance this and hold on to it forever and hand it to your kids one day and maybe take a vacation every once in a while, or vice versa. Sometimes it's easier to take a vacation when you've got venture money. So I think it's just a matter of like understanding, is this a company that you want to build carefully with full control and slowly over time and build wealth that way? And that's 100% great. I love that. In fact, I always tell people, if you can build a company without venture capital, you absolutely should. Venture capital is helpful for if you want to grow really big, really fast, and you need to do that because there's competition chomping at your heels, or AI is going to come in and change everything and you need to move now. Those are the types of things that venture can be helpful for. And really, you should only take venture capital money if it's the only way for you to grow. So I would just encourage founders to kind of understand that and grow, and don't just take anybody's money. You don't want that in the long run. It may feel appealing, and then the thing that I think that maybe we don't talk enough about is, I think investors in this early stage in places like Wyoming and rural, where we are doing this gardening type of growth, is think of it more as gardening and not so much as hunting. Like rather than sitting on that cliff with your binoculars and like searching for the one deal that's going to change your life or change everybody's life or like make the headlines in Wyoming, let's grow 10 or 20 or 100 potential startups and like teach them, how do you find a CEO if you don't want to be the CEO? How do you build out your team? what does a go to market strategy actually look like when you just need to make one sale, like one at a time? You're chipping away at it a dollar at a time. Because I think a lot of times investors are, they're like, they've just got too far to go for commercialization, or they don't have their team built out yet. Let's like help them learn and help them grow and garden them through the process a little bit, and understand that when you're investing in a place like Wyoming, that that's the kind of nurturing and support that they really need. And support ecosystems, I suppose, or like programs like G Beta and
Right.
accelerators and things like that that can really help founders understand what they're up against.
I think that's a great perspective, and I'm glad you added that in. The gardening analogy is spot on because you need different ingredients, different nutrients for different climates, environments, markets, whatever it is. And it's just as important for the investors to understand that. Investors, they come in with a perspective and a background of their own and need to understand whomever they're investing in, what their ultimate goals are. And so how can it be mutual? And when there's that symbiosis, then that's how the gardens really thrive. So it's
Yeah,
fantastic.
exactly. And I guess, easy for me to say, like, just go invest in a bunch of companies. Like, not my money. And I tell founders it's too easy for me to say, just stay up all night and send out 10,000 reach outs. Like, no
Yeah.
big deal. This is all really hard. This is all really hard stuff to do. And I don't mean to say that there's any one easy answer. I just think people hear patient and they think, oh, it might take a year or two. No, I'm talking like 10, 20, 30 years is how long it takes to build this kind of thing. And so relentlessly chipping away at that and just trying to live every day, waking up like, what could be possible today? Believing in people. I'm not saying you should necessarily go throw a whole bunch of money at somebody that, isn't ready for that, but we can support the ecosystems that help them become ready. And sometimes this kind of like, I just need the one deal. It's going to change everything is what if you miss on the one deal? Let's build 10, 20, or 100 deals and maybe one of them will make it.
Bailey, thank you so much. This has been
Thanks for
really
having me.
insightful. I love the perspective. June 11th, the G Beta Wyoming Startup Showcase at Laramie County Community College.
Which is in Cheyenne, by the way. I should say it's not in Laramie. It's always confusing, not Laramie, it's in Cheyenne.
All right. Thank you for that clarification. Um, really appreciate your time and excited to see what comes out of the next cohort and the next cohort. Thanks so
Thank you so
much.
much. Thanks for all of your work as well, and thanks for having me.